it really feels like it comes down to relationship and, communication, honoring, that person's wisdom and the wisdom in their system that needs to really be a path that I am following, not leading. And you cannot do that if you don't have a strong connection and bilateral, respect and communication between people. But once you have that part in place, it kind of opens the door for so many other things to actually be impactful.
Hello, friends. So, I have the wonderful privilege today of being joined by the amazing Dr. Katie Dahlgren. I'm not going to give you a big introduction because I just don't do that anymore. I think we're moving away from all the wonderful things people do and that extensive long 5-minute list. But I will say you are founder and medical director of Tree Integrative Medicine. And, my intro for this is just the story that going on 20 years ago at this point, when I was in the midst of my own chronic illness journey,
Mm-hmm.
um, you were the first doctor who got it. After going through probably half a dozen, at least, I walked into your office, and between you and me, I kind of thought, God, she's really young, and didn't really realize, oh, you're just a savant.
What?
Okay. You were right at the forefront, extremely young right off the bat. And within just seconds, I was like, thank goodness she's brilliant. And that was really the beginning. No joke, that was absolutely the beginning of my foray from the psycho-emotional, the spiritual, the archetypal, into the biological, and into healing. So, thank you for just being that person in my life.
Wow.
And thank you for just, the years. And I know this for a fact. I know a lot of naturopaths, and they all do different various things. You are definitely one of the ones who's just been like deeply doing the work in the trenches, not necessarily grandstanding, and and also just evolving. Because I've also, I've seen you a few times over the years, and I've always been so wonderfully not just impressed, but inspired, at how you have continued to develop and hone your skills in ways that I think are really rare. So, for all of those reasons, I wanted to kind of circle back after all these years and just see how you are and have a few questions about where you've come on the journey.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I think of you so much more as a practitioner that I kind of forgot that we went back that far and that I was that young when we first started working together. And I'm so happy that that was your experience of how I show up. And I hope it's still how I show up to my patients, because all of the education, the ongoing, seminars and, things that were constantly, those of us who were just compelled really to keep learning more and more and more about the complexity of the human condition in so many ways. Doesn't matter if you don't have a genuine determination to connect with people, to really see them for what's going on their whole life, and it's why my intakes are so long and why I ask so many questions. But that was something that I really felt like I started to feel when I was much younger than when I even graduated from medical school. And truly, some of the science aspects of medical school were really hard for me, because the human aspect of it is a way that I connect so much more with people. And of course, feel like this work comes through me and not from me. So as long as I continue to be open to that and understanding that there is a collective consciousness, if you tap into the right vibrations, that is going to help lead you to, clearing a path to people's healing. I can't heal people, but healing can happen if people want it, and they can find a way to get there. And it's just that so many of my patients, probably like you felt at the time, were kind of stuck in the weeds, and probably looking at all of those things on more of a this piece of the health or that piece of the health that didn't quite bring it all together the way that you needed it to at that time.
Mm. Yeah, and I love the way you say that the medicine, comes through you. I really think there's a total line in the sand. Not to, cast any judgments across the landscape, but those healers who really embrace that idea that our work is to kind of cleanse our own vessel
Mm.
so that whatever is coming through is the least distorted
Yeah,
by us, essentially.
right.
I mean, that's really, I think, certainly for me, has been a tremendous amount of work.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
it's a lot of work.
it's a lot of work. So let me just ask, like working with the sickest of the sick, over all these years, I really want to know kind of where the medicine has taken you, right? Or where you have been taken by it. Like when you're looking up at the stars, you're sitting in front of the fire, you're with your family, you're contemplating the span of your journey as a healer, and maybe even why you're here and what is your contribution, and of course what you've now seen over all this time. What comes to you in those moments?
I really feel like my primary role is to uh, see people, have people truly feel seen. And so, as much as I do continue to try to understand the science that's going into recommending certain interventions to stay as cutting edge as possible, I think that's so important, because the next thing that you may learn about may be that one thing that you were waiting for that one patient. And usually each 3 to 4 day conference, that's pretty much about what you get out of it when you've been like immersed in this for such a long time, as a few really precious pearls of information. The bigger thing, it's really become increasingly clear to me that it is the relationship. The first office visits, for example, with my patients always are by far the most exhausting, but also, like you had said earlier, the most inspiring, because people often come in here really, really uh, desperate, scared. They're in a state that is almost on the verge of giving up. So many of them, and almost always they can walk out of here or leave our video call or whatever at the end of that first contact and say, "I feel hope. I feel safer, with you, even though clearly there's more relationship to build there." I think that is such a foundation of
Mm-hmm.
actual potential for anything to work. It does not matter how good your
Mm-hmm.
intervention recommendations may be. If you are missing that, a lot of people don't actually end up getting the healing that they need. And that is probably because once people get to the point that they are in my office or probably talking to you, they've been through so much and they've been let down by so much. And so many of the systems of medicine that were kind of overwhelmingly raised up to put a lot of faith in have failed people. And when you see, for me, I look back and I really think a big part of that is both reductionistic thinking, but also, the 5 to 6 minute office visit. You cannot build a relationship with people to really help understand where their cracks of the foundation exist, and whether that's in their relationships or in their sleep habits or in their dietary or their home environment or whatever. It keeps coming down to those initial foundational pieces that are not very exciting for the most part. They're not they're not new and glamorous. They're not peptides, which I use, but still, like, it's not the same. And yet it's so critical. And so when I look back, like you said, from that bigger view, what is my role here? It really feels like it comes down to relationship. And communication, honoring that person's wisdom and the wisdom in their system that needs to really be a path that I am following, not leading. And you cannot do that if you don't have a strong connection and bilateral, respect and communication between people. But once you have that part in place, it kind of opens the door for so many other things to actually be impactful. But so much of that healing, I know, happens there, and not necessarily with whatever whatever the protocol might end up looking like. And I do think there's value to that, or I wouldn't tell people to do it, but it just feels like that is the 20 to 30%, and then you've got your 70 to 80% that is far more about people feeling seen, understood, seeing where there could have been some fractures that happened in their wholeness, from trauma of some sort, infectious or personal or whatever, that absolutely have to be addressed, but also recognizing we are physical beings having a spiritual experience. You do have to take care of both. So it's blending those things, but starting with some sort of relationship.
Hmm. It's so refreshing to hear you say that, you know. I think, once again, without casting aspersions, I do think that's where the naturopathic world, at least for me, has always been ahead of the game with regards to the allopathic. I mean, the allopathic, all respect to everyone in it, there's a
Of course.
tremendous amount of wisdom,
Yes.
but one of the main pieces, and there are a number of pieces that they seem to be still missing, is that relational piece. And it's not a superficial piece. I can almost hear some people imagining, thinking to themselves, oh, just seeing someone, attuning to someone, what does that do at a
Mm-hmm.
healing level? And yet,
Mm-hmm.
we both know, I mean, just on the level of trauma, like the psyche does not open itself up if there isn't trust. So you're
Right.
not going to even be able to access those areas. There's a whole constriction that takes place in the nervous system and the body when someone is not being seen and persistently not being seen. And then in those moments, let's say, as you're describing, focusing on the biological and kind of trying to hammer that home
Mm-hmm.
against that very constriction that is taking place because the attunement, the relational piece, the energetic isn't there.
Yeah.
I think it's amazing just to hear you say that because I do think that's definitely the future. I mean, how, as a doctor, how did that come about for you? Because I would almost, I mean, did you just have mentors along the line? Because I'm thinking about it as the medical field, right? I mean, there are
Mm-hmm.
so many that are still not doing that and that
Right.
completely marginalize. And essentially, it's like a kind of cultural medical dissociation from
Mm-hmm.
this aspect, not just of the psyche or of the body, but of life itself.
Mm-hmm.
How did you find your path out of that into this other world that we find ourselves in?
You know, even from when I was an undergraduate, I chose to minor in psychology because I recognized the importance of like understanding what motivates people, what influences people, what shapes people. If I could have, I would have also majored in sociology and probably like a dozen other things. And so even starting there, I started to recognize that if I wanted, and I wanted to be a doctor since I was probably six, but I thought this would look very different than what this looks like now, of course. I'm like, I'm going to be a conventional pediatrician, not even close to how I landed, except that there's a doctor title involved. But then I went to Bastyr to get my medical degree, and in the last year, they allow the senior clinicians to apply to be on the do a 1 year counseling internship. And so it's a totally optional. They only pick 4 or 5 people a year, and then you kind of help mentor some of the other younger, earlier students. I guess not necessarily younger, but like first year, second years, and that too felt like it was helping me because I really understood even then how important the connection and the influence of not just psychology. Of course, that wasn't really about spirituality, and it still really isn't because that's so individual for people. I highly encourage people to have a connection to spirit, but what that looks like is completely up to them. I don't have any interest in guiding that. However, being able to really connect with people on that level, and I really liked that the rules then because I was not graduated yet. They're like, you cannot give medical advice during this. Your only ability to help people during these sessions, 3 or 4 a week for a year, is by actually asking them what's going on and figuring out how you can help them find the answers to their own problems overwhelmingly, because the answer often does lie within us. So starting there and recognizing I really enjoyed that, having an hour to just ask people questions and get information from them and hear their story, felt like that set me up to be able to help people once I could integrate in medical procedures and injections and prescribing and herbs and diet, just everything else that falls into the category of technically practicing medicine.
Hmm.
That was a drive that I've had since I was very, very young, and already felt like, before even graduating from high school, was the thing that I valued the most about relationships with people was that connection. And then I've had a number of mentors who have shown this model, who have fortunately, although I would love for the accessibility for people to be able to utilize insurance to be able to compensate for my time, it is very limiting. They do dictate how much time and how you practice medicine. And so fortunately, the clinics I've been at, they knew that wasn't a model that would work if you want to do medicine this way, where we can say we want to spend 1 to 2 hours, but we do need to be compensated for our time for that. And in the long run, I do believe ends up being more efficient and cost effective because people are actually able to get results almost always faster or sometimes just at all because of being able to get more of a comprehensive view of what's going on and be able to have that back and forth of understanding how people are responding to things, what are their insights or concerns, because our patients are really smart. So their lack of knowledge is definitely not an aspect of this that plays into it for almost any of them. There's maybe a few who just haven't had an interest in or pursued that, but most people are doing a lot of their own research to try to get to the point of finding who can help me with these complex issues. But yeah, to circle back to your question, just the draw started very young, and then I've fortunately been able to just develop it and ultimately have my own practice where I can establish all of the rules about how I want to practice, and all of those things is a nice place to be, where I feel like I can mold it and shape it into what I feel drawn to doing, that I feel really does serve people the best.
Mm. Yeah, and I so appreciate that. What do for those who are still out there, and I also have to tip my hat as well as you just did to the chronic illness patient population that are just such educated, deep, soulful, empathic, usually
Mm-hmm.
individuals. Yeah, what are you seeing today as, I have a theory. I'm not trying to lead the witness here, but I'll just say it outright. What I have seen over the years is it's oftentimes the empath in the family that gets sick.
Mm-hmm.
It's the one who almost has the thinnest veil, um, not just empathically or intuitively, but also at a boundary level, not in a good way,
Mm-hmm.
and that ends up almost pooling a lot of the projected, unmetabolized, unacknowledged trauma of like other individuals, especially the narcissistic individuals in the family, kind of into the gully of their own bodies. That has been, for me, probably the biggest trend that I've seen, psychosomatically. Like, does that ring true with what you've seen over the years?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, without question.
yeah, interesting. So for me, it's been this, I keep having these recursive steps of going back, and trying to look at it at the highest perspective I can. And I've seen this whole phenomenon of what I'm now describing in my own mind as kind of the yin contingent of humanity,
Mm-hmm.
the most yin contingent of humanity, who are bearing the burden of what the yang contingent has done and where they have taken us, right, in
Mm-hmm.
culture, in
Mm-hmm.
all the ways, right? And it's
Mm-hmm.
not just a masculine feminine thing, right? Because at this point in time, gender has kind of collapsed from its traditional structures, but
Right.
the archetypal yin, whether in a man or a woman or anyone else,
Right.
is still very much present. And same with the archetypal yang. We don't simply look at men doing these things, and I don't,
Right.
once again, no judgment, but it's just it's an aspect of the psyche that seems to be doing this. So I guess I just want to kind of open that up, almost like, do you see your role in this larger drama that is taking place in culture as, a healer, really in the trenches, essentially strengthening, supporting, scaffolding, up-leveling these individuals who, what is the power of the yin, right? At least for me, it's these are the ones who should be guiding the ship because they are the most sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
They're not the strongest. The yang will always be stronger, but they have deeper wisdom. And it's almost like I keep wondering to myself, is this a time where we're being tasked to support that contingent to come up and essentially re-empower themselves and take their rightful positions?
Oh, definitely. That definitely resonates for me. And I guess I see it the most in my practice. I could really with most of my patients, but the autistic kids, even the nonverbal ones, with their they have so much sensitivity. And yet you can tell how wise and if you can find a way to help them be able to access communication, instead of feeling as maybe necessarily trapped in their body where there is just an inability. But I do feel like to some extent that's a self-protective mechanism of shutting down because it's all too much. And being able to help support that scaffolding where you can create some safety and some structure where it can be possible then to have connection that isn't totally overwhelming, that's probably the most dramatic of the examples that I come across in my clinical practice every day. These are special souls, everybody's is, but you can really see just a different, both sweetness but in tuneness that is there, but also, like I said, true for pretty much most chronically ill, complex chronically ill, severely ill patients. I would absolutely agree. These are the patients and the people who have that vulnerability, but also awareness and ability to really feel and people in different levels and understand things that other people don't even necessarily have an awareness for. But all of that can feel very difficult to carry and process when there's a lot of systems in place throughout, starting with just regular education, but also in, most conventional medical care that is not aware or open to that aspect of our being and our health at all. And it's usually, though, their strategies, interestingly, are to try to dull that exact thing. Like, oh, it's too much, then we will just make it so you feel it less. This is where things like suppressive antidepressants come in, and not to say there isn't a role for all of these medications in different people. I do believe that is true, and that they're being completely overused and abused and to make things easier, for the rest of society to help them fit into that more young model. And so I do think that if there's going to be true healing, that it is important that gentler, softer, I think there still can be strength in that, but it is not usually in the form of physical strength, is the hard part. Those are the people whose bodies tend to have more susceptibilities and vulnerabilities, are more likely to take things on, whether it's cancer or Lyme disease or, soaking up all the mold toxins. They are porous, beings, both emotionally and physically. And so in figuring out how to be protected within that space without closing it off and losing the gifts that come with it is a challenging thing for people to arrive at on their own, and definitely a challenging thing for us as clinicians to try to help people find the difference between protectiveness and defensiveness, and that does mirror in the medicine. And not to say I don't use antimicrobials, including in the herbs or the pharmaceuticals. So there's a place for all of this, but the attacking and defending, part of it needs to be for, in my opinion, more on that protection side than on the aggression side. And I think that a lot of people have a hard time telling the difference, and even their approach to medicine. Oh, I want the strongest, way to get there. What's the fastest way to get there? That may not be the smartest way to get there, or even the possible way to get there. Definitely not the way to get there if you want to arrive at a higher level of happiness and well-being. Is probably not it. For the few people that's actually a successful approach for, if you're really applying that to a gentle empath soul, it's going to feel like wearing a costume, rather than feeling genuine, and that's going to be, weak by nature. It's not genuine.
Yeah, I love the way you're kind of referring to that energetic piece of the work. That's something that I think I always had a sense of, but certainly, probably like you, has really increased over the years. That entire biofield of energy is going to tell us what is right for it. And even just asking questions around, do we explore this? Do we explore that? It's going to expand and to contract with a tremendous amount of regularity and trustworthiness. Although not to make things too complicated, but as you will also know, there are traumas that can actually flip that or switch that in the ART model that we sometimes refer to. I find that all the time. But just to speak to that, and once again, I think that's also what you're referring to when you talk about seeing people, right? Getting back to like to really see someone is not it's not something that's solely marginalized to the visual cortex. It's
Not
like
at all.
it's the energetic, it's the biofield, and to holistically do the kind of work that you're talking about, I think honors that.
Mm,
Um,
mhm.
and it's true, this yang approach, like, I mean, I love the fact that you bring up antidepressants. And once again, the holistic approach is antidepressants are sometimes useful. We know this. Of course they are. It's not one or the other. It's
Right,
holistic. It's all of it.
right,
But I mean, I've already worked with a number of individuals to help them get off of that because, it helped them at a moment.
right.
And yet after the fact, now it's like, okay, now it's really just suppressing your ability to feel into your body,
Hmm.
to access and align with your energetic heart, and on and
Right.
on and on it goes. Um, and all of these things can't really be theoretically addressed accurately, I think, if you're not including the energetic.
Exactly.
Yeah. Um, and you also mentioned, that you work a lot with, autistic children and families.
Hmm.
This is something I only worked with back in the day. I have not. I've worked with some parents still to this day,
Hmm.
but I don't work with children of that nature. But I think it's really fascinating that you bring that up in terms of kind of within that context of the yin, essentially kind of pushing out, the madness and chaos in the world in some way, shape, or form. I kind of think that's fascinating. Do you want to just say more about what you've seen on the front line of this world, a little more around what you see is happening, what these souls are doing, what they're trying to tell us even?
Yeah. So, I mean, these are canaries. They are highly, highly sensitive, and there are definite identifiable physical things that are happening as far as like genetic SNPs, although then we can get into the whole field of epigenetics and expressions and how things like our psyche may guide how that unfolds. But then also environmental toxicity and things. So we've got all of those reasons why we do see an escalation in autism diagnoses, some of which is awareness, but not all of it for sure. I was at a conference recently where they were saying, I think in California, they're now quoting like up to 1 in 5 kids that are being diagnosed on the spectrum. I mean, something is wrong here. But then if we look too at the overall, I mean, particularly in this country, because I can't really speak too much on the international, as I just have very little experience with that, other than the patients who come to consult with me from other places. But in this country in particular, as we all know, like there's a lot of hurt systems, hurt people, uh, brokenness, I would even say. And so I do wonder if that's part of where we're seeing an escalation of this, is that somewhat these souls are coming with an intent to have a healing purpose. And in order for that to happen, it can't be in the same systems, and that they can't work within what we've already created that has some flaws. And it'll always be flawed, but right now feels like maybe a more uh, a time full of a lot of turmoil. Not the only one in human history by a long shot, but still feels very much like that is the case. And where I feel like there's almost this drawing happening of the people that have the potential to heal, if we can figure out how to access that and then also integrate that type of energy and vibration into our approaches moving forward.
Mm. I mean, with that being said, yeah, to what degree do you see the people that, well, I should say it in a different way because I have no doubt that your patients, you choose them perhaps carefully or they choose you perhaps carefully,
Mm,
and
yeah.
you know that when you go on a journey like the patients and clients that I work with, they're really ready for a transformation. They're really
Mm-hmm.
ready to go in and completely reconfigure their lives and use the invitation of chronic illness as a complete upleveling of everything, as the message that it is, as the message that I discovered it was for me. It's a complete um, defrag and
Mm-hmm.
rehabilitation of essentially who you thought you were in a wonderful way, despite the fact that, you know, we would sell our parents to the gypsies to avoid having gone through all the suffering of it. But
Right.
if you can embrace that, there's nothing better. So my question is like, do you do you still encounter a bifurcation in individuals of those who still just want it to go away and are
Yeah,
not interested in transformation, and then the others? And then maybe how do you work with both, or do you not work with both?
I work with both. In fact, I would say only between 25 and 30% of my patients come in with the knowledge and the awareness that that is part of what process they're on. And those, 25 to 30% are very clear on that, and they've often already started to do quite a bit of higher level energetic healing work. Their missing piece usually is more on the physical plane. And then we've got the other, the rest of them, the majority, for what it's worth, that are still looking for a solution. I just want this to go away, like you said. The nice thing, beautiful thing I will meet everybody where they are. And so even for those patients that really are looking for a magic fix, that usually means there's going to be quite a bit of education happening, and that's where the relationship really has to be built, because this is going to look like such a different model and approach that it's so cool when these people that come in feeling like they can treat complex chronic illness like it's a skin infection, and if you just do this for 2 weeks it will be gone and you'll never have to think about it ever again, is absolutely not how it works. And I would say the majority of those remainder at some point do get to the point that they're like, I think I figured this out, that I do feel like there's a greater purpose to this suffering and what I'm supposed to do with it and what they go on to do with that in their lives. So, it always looks different for each person. I've seen people be able to do this in healing in so many different industries, including like finance and real estate, things where you're like, how could that possibly be? But they are showing up for people and to the world in a different way that is more healing and engaging in a positive way. So I see that happen, and others do go into the healing arts like yourself, like where they take this as a calling to really make it all about who they are and want to work specifically with this patient population. Others, somewhat understandably, don't. Like they're like, I do not want to have to be all day, every day in this because this was my life for so long. That's okay. You can still have embrace that healing, be using it to level up in whatever that looks like in their life, and then have it have a ripple effect on everything else that's around them. For sure, if you look at how that's going to impact intergenerational, multi-generational, inherited traumas both ways, then we're getting into some very esoteric things, but which I truly believe are very much real. But that type of healing can really shift people's perspective, and they see things differently. And once they go through that, I hear it pretty much every day that people are like, you can't unsee it. You can't, so many of these things that used to feel like high priorities for me no longer match what I'm looking for. For one thing, even just that whole idea of trying to avoid discomfort, whether that's physical or mental, emotional, at all costs, that it feels like in society we're kind of taught to do. Here, take a Tylenol, take a whatever, all the suppressive things to make you more comfortable in this moment so that you don't have to actually be uncomfortable, or figure out the answer to why you're uncomfortable. We're just going to silence it, that alarm system in our body, we're just going to shut it off. And again, not to say there's not rules for all of those things, but when it's an ongoing pattern that is being used more to kind of deflect and avoid trying to move through it or learn what you need to from that, it can keep people pretty stuck. And some people don't get there in the time that I'm working with them, even if that's like a decade or more. Others, they do get there, but it may take a decade or more. And so we're just kind of patiently working through it and mostly addressing symptoms in that, while building the relationship and looking for glimpses of windows where there might be an openness or a way to say something a certain way, or refer people to a different practitioner or a book, or something, some kind of meditative practice, something that will help them, that's a good fit for them, that helps them to explore that other side and learn to observe and see some of the messages that are in our suffering and in our process that otherwise don't happen. So a lot of people do get there. I've had to really detach from that though, because I can't make them get there. I don't really want to be in a frustrated space, given that my role is primarily still on more physical, levels of healing, while I'm always integrating those other parts. Like, will I do that for people where we are looking strictly at pathogens and toxins and physiological function? Yes. But always hoping that either on their own or with something that I might be able to introduce to their idea at the right moment, when there's an openness, will expand that idea of what true health is, and what our purpose is for being here, what these types of traumas and experiences and symptoms might even be here to teach us, and empower people to feel like then we also have more of a chance of shifting it, and making it more deeply meaningful, instead of the pursuit of comfort and happiness, without any embracing of the other aspects of our process.
Mm. Yeah, we're on the same page.
I know.
I love what you just said, because it just relates to what, I think my entire practice is really
It is.
based on. It's
Yep.
based on the mythology, the
Mhm.
archetypal journey of going into the underworld. And
Right.
that is the embracing of pain, right? Like the not simply avoiding of
Right.
the underworld in all the various ways that culture says, I will take that responsibility from you. And you
Hmm.
can doom stroll, you can take Tylenol, you can take all these different
Right.
ways to
Right.
avoid essentially your hero's journey in life. And maybe just, I know that you, once again, kind of have your own way of working energetically with this, but I mean, one of the things that chronic illness gave me was the understanding. I mean, to this day, it's kind of still just shocking to me, but it was that understanding that when we let go into the pain, into the chaos that is the body undergoing a chronic complex illness,
Mhm.
our awareness has the ability to, moment by moment, piece by piece, step by step, actually do a kind of slow motion energetic surgery
Mhm.
on whatever the areas are. And a lot of the time there are many, as you well know, whether it's the trauma of low thyroid, oh well, always related to the voice. Heart disease, I have found, always related to actually not being in alignment with the energetic heart. I mean, breast cancer. I
Mhm.
mean, there's so many
Mhm.
different, all of it's there. And the body, those energetic tentacles within the body, it took me so long to recognize, are reaching out to us. It feels like pain, but when a baby cries, that is pain. And if we're just suppressing it every time, it's only
Right.
going to get worse. Whereas, I mean, mothers have known this since the beginning of time. The baby cries, she grounds, the quickest way to help the baby is if she grounds her nervous system and then
Mhm.
moves there and slowly feels into what's happening. And that was, once again, as a fairly young male, when I was, taken over by chronic illness, that was the big revelation, that I could let go into that fire and listen to what was being asked of me, and
Mhm.
actually move things around within my own body. And I don't know about you, but that has certainly been one of the things that I think patients that I've worked with has really moved the needle for them. That they can put their hands back on that wheel, even if it's burning hot. They can put it
Right.
on the wheel, and have an impact internally, energetically.
Definitely. I
Yeah.
I just agree.
Yeah.
That's right.
What do you think keeps people stuck the most these days from like your practice? Like, what are you seeing? Back in the day, it was like trauma, moldy house, dental infections. You know, what are you seeing? For those who are still out there and maybe they're listening to this and saying like, "Give me the thing. I'm still in it."
Oh. Oh, the thing, the
The thing,
magic wand, the
the
magic
magic bullet.
bullet, the thing. We're always looking for all of the things that can be contributing, because they all of those things are still relevant. They're still problematic. If you have a toxic relationship, a toxic house, a toxic job, whatever that may be,
Right.
it's then making you probably more vulnerable to infections. Which, can you get an infection that can just change the whole course of your life? Yes, although think of all the people who have had exposures to Lyme disease, mold illness, whatever, who are able to recover from that or even end up stronger or never exhibit symptoms in the first place. So I think looking for those specific areas have value because it can guide for sure, the way that I'm recommending herbs and medications and peptides and whatever else I'm including into my treatments, hormones. There's ways to stabilize the physiology that are really important, because if you have the susceptibility in the first place, that could be because of some being out of alignment with some purpose, or this is a lesson that needs to be taught, then you still do get the illnesses, and can show on objective data that they're there. It's just a question of like how critical is that one piece to helping people heal, because people too are always looking for, oh, so if I get out of the moldy house, I will be totally fine then. No, even if you're able to somehow magically clear all mold illness from their system, there's still that question about how did we get there? Why did that happen in the first place? If we haven't gotten to that part, it will re-manifest in another way, whether that's with mold or with something else altogether. It's a temporary solution that needs to be broader than that in order to come up with some true healing. Yes, I still look at all of those things that I mentioned, and I'm always going to conferences and looking online. Like, that's my dopamine problem, is like researching and trying to find more solutions, listen to more people, read articles that I can get more information about, to be able to get this ideas of where's the other things that we can, influence the immune system, repair the immune mechanism, and try to reduce excessive inflammation and the cell danger response that can be, elicited by so many different things. If you don't correct those things, probably all of the spiritual healing in the world still may not also be enough, unless that's enough to shift the way that the cells are behaving, which is possible, but not very many people get there. It's very, very challenging, as you can probably attest to yourself. These are not easy paths to figure out, but I won't limit what their potential can do. A truly spiritually evolved, connected person, I think, can elicit healing in their own body and others in ways that most of us can never even think about, envision at all. So is there anything new to the world? I mean, other than in the last 6 years or so, there's been a new element for sure that's contributed some dysfunction physiologically in our world, with COVID and everything that comes with that, spike protein, changes in the way that the society's structured and functions, and there's so much that came with that. That's new, just because it's a new label of something, but were there illnesses that did similar things previously? Yes. So always looking for those things to see how we can use the tools that are available to us to change that course, repair some of the things that were damaged. And yet, the more I get into my career and the more I learn about all of these things and where do the genetics play in, and I'm looking, I won't stop looking, because I think that there's some really pieces of gold in there that will help some people, is back to that foundational piece. And so I spend more time now than I did when I first graduated as a naturopath, where we are primarily taught to do foundational medicine. There still is that temptation to use higher force, when as a primary strategy. It's something people recognize, to some extent. Some people respect it more. They think if you did something surgical, that must be more important than telling them drink clean water. So the foundations are becoming more challenging. It seems like there's people who have more of an awareness around the importance of all of the hygiene aspects in life, and then there's spiritual hygiene, their emotional hygiene, everything, not just their environment, or what they're taking into their body or putting on their body, but helping people stabilize those levels still is something that is an ongoing conversation, because it has been normalized so much everywhere else, that I really feel like I spend more time now going over those types of aspects of their health and asking how can we put the tools in place to help stabilize that, while also addressing some of whatever specific pathogen toxicities might need to be addressed for that individual. That also seems to be the place where they start to tune into their body more, in ways that, like, if you're just aware of your hydration needs or of your sleep needs, of the way that our screen time is impacting our circadian rhythms and our dopamine pathways, then there starts to be like, okay, what else? So wait a second, if I could shift just based on how these things are influencing, how can I recognize pathological patterns in other ways that I now may have because I can recognize them, have the potential to be able to start to shift and change.
Right, and I love the way you talk about the allopathic world. I mean, they will often choose surgery right out the gate,
Of
and
course.
it's like there are so many other things to hit first before you even consider that. I mean,
Right.
it's just still a little shocking. But you also mentioned another good point, which is and certainly in the way that I work, the most challenging part of working with someone is when the pathology is within themselves.
Right.
It's like the closer in you get, the more sensitive and nuanced, the more important the rapport, the relationship is, because it's like, well, if your house is sick, well, easy, you can just dissociate from it. If your partner's sick, well, it's their fault. If the family has pathology, illness, and stuff, like, okay, that's not you. But then what if it's them?
Right.
So I'm kind of interested to know, I work a lot with the archetypes, so it's like, how do you, what's your entry point, or how are you finding working with individuals where you start to realize something's that they're in the way, whether they're possessed by the archetype of the devouring father like Kronos, or the devouring mother, or the victim termed perpetrator in Medusa, or the overgiver Echo who's married to Narcissus, like, and they're doing it, they're choosing it, or whatever it might be. Like, how do you what's your approach to kind of slowly move towards the very peace that they themselves are clinging to, that
Right.
is perpetuating their own, at least a portion of their own illness.
So I don't understand the specific archetypes the same way that you do, for sure. That is a level of expertise that you have mastered that I do not have. However, as far as the ideas of it, I think I do understand, and some of those are obvious. You can see.
Sure.
Um, I I feel like I'm starting to, as I've gotten further and further into my career, I can almost tell from the way that I read through. Granted, it's like a 20-page intake questionnaire, but still, and some of that is I've designed those questions to somewhat be able to elicit those patterns and be able to recognize them from having dealt with so many people. And I try really hard not to make that become like a bias, or that, oh, I've figured out what's wrong with you and I don't know anything about you really. But how often I'm immediately able to be like, okay, like that's something that is pretty clear. And sometimes it takes a little bit more for us working together for me to be able to see that type of a thing. But often I can see it, if not in that first office visit, or even when I'm preparing for the first office visit. That part I feel like I can start to see just in like casual conversations at my kids' soccer games and things, where you're like, okay, you can hear it in people's patterns, the way they talk about things and the way that they react to things. There's certainly patterns that can be identified there that often do have some connection to those types of
Yeah.
I'm not even going to call it pathology. It is what it is. But getting people to the point where they are able to see it as something other than a blaming, attacking, shaming, because of that clinginess, and usually identifying with that so much that they don't know the difference between what that is and who they really are separate from it. That is much more challenging.
Right.
Very few patients come in remotely close to able or willing to even be open to that. And that's why I usually have to build more of that relationship and ask them more and more questions about their experience in their body, their experience in life, their goals in life, their ambitions, their fears, things like that
Hmm.
that come up through the process of working together, even though we're like, oh, what we're addressing is these liver enzymes that are abnormal. No, it isn't. It is, but they will normalize. However, it's more that through that process, eventually people start to, there's seeds that are planted, they start to seek these things out a little bit on their own, or they're open to referrals I might receive or might provide to them. Because as you probably know, if I refer 100 people to you specifically, maybe two are actually going to follow through and be able to connect to that work in a way that will actually heal. And that's true of a few other people in my field that I send to do more of this type of work. I have to really make sure that patient is in the right place, based on whatever their framework is of how they expect medicine to work. Otherwise, they're kind of like they feel it almost like an attack of me saying what has been probably told to them by other people that I'm not saying, but words being put in my mouth. This is in your head.
This
This
is in
is,
your head.
this is not real. This
Right.
is not a medical problem. You have a psychological or even a spiritual problem without recognizing it's all the same thing. You
Right.
can't
We can't even, we
tease
shouldn't even be
apart.
saying it's all in your head anymore. We should just say it's in your
Right.
body. Like, because
Right.
it's
Exactly.
that
It's not
anyway.
your head. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny, as we're talking about this, I'm kind of just, I mean, what has been your experience, if any, with Munchausen by proxy? I mean, I found that to be, one of the most challenging. I mean, when you talk about going into the underworld of someone, it's like, wow, I don't know. I mean, just off the cuff, I don't know if there's another, dysfunction that is probably as potentially shaming and difficult to work with as something like that. I mean, that's really, narcissism's even, it almost is not as bad as that to some degree, although they're very similar. They
Yeah.
overlap.
Yeah.
But like, have you had much experience with that in the family realm of late?
Yes. I have a handful. That's incredibly challenging. I couldn't agree more. That is, I can't say that I am reliably, consistently, and definitely not quickly able to address that in the way that I would like to, because I do see the harm that is unfolding. And at times I almost feel like if I don't fire patients very often, like at all. Usually it requires some kind of clear abuse towards me or my staff or something, or it's like, okay, no. But there are times when I seriously question, and when that type of situation's going on, where I'm almost being used to further the harm, um, and rather than helping to
Right.
heal. And so, really, two or three families usually. It's not just single patients. They usually bring everybody, which mostly I love doing. But in that type of specific uh, presentation, family situation, that is so hard, and I don't have a great solution to it.
Right. But it's fascinating what you say. I mean, I've only encountered two in my career that I was directly in contact with, and I found exactly what you just said, which is, I mean, those kinds of people, I just think they don't seek someone like me out. I mean, the
Right.
very complex itself is going to have an immune system response to anyone who's attempting to resolve it.
Exactly.
And to your point, which I think is really fascinating, is that pattern will try to conscript others into bolstering the pattern to continue.
Hmm.
And not only that, but also to actually repeat the very pattern of abuse with, let's say, staff and or practitioners, which is just kind of mind-boggling, that's out there and that we have to kind of work with that.
Hmm.
Probably like you, my own experiences, and I've had a lot more experience with working with children of narcissistic parents. I mean, that is like has been a
Right.
huge part of my own practice. Not so dissimilar. I mean,
No.
really not so dissimilar at all when you really come down to it. I mean, there are deep degrees, and I mean, I'd love to maybe hear some of your thoughts about that because I see it so clearly and simply at this point. I mean, it's just not complicated anymore. And once again, how do we say these things without applying, tremendous amount of judgment to that
Right.
poor soul that has swerved into the realm of narcissism because they have been so terribly traumatized.
Right.
I mean, the narcissistic kind of move psycho-emotionally, as far as I'm concerned, is it's like the worst and most extreme kind of defensive adaptation from
Hmm.
trauma that essentially not only cuts the individual off somatically, relationally from others, but feels that the only way the relationship can take place is if it's vampiric. So that you're only looking to take, literally suck energy from the other, and that is considered at their level to be the only relational tether that they can even have. And so, probably like you, I've worked with so many children. I mean, adult children. These are not just young people. I mean, these are people in their
Right.
40s and 50s and
Right.
60s,
Right.
right up until the edge where it's like, oh my gosh. And I've been through many, probably like you, where the parent finally dies. If you're lucky enough to have an intervention between them prior to that moment, otherwise, when they go into into the bardo, if nothing's been done, the grief and the resentment that takes place from the child is so overwhelming, and it does feel like a missed opportunity. It does feel like I wish I'd said something, I wish I'd done something, even if it was going to blow up even more. I have found now over time, perhaps like you, that it's actually better to prepare something and do something, I mean, oftentimes, usually it has nothing to do with creating a resolution. It has
Right.
something to do with unburdening the individual who has suffered for so long. And then
Hmm.
there can be a little bit of peace, whereas once again, when nothing is done, and the narcissistic parent just kind of goes off into wherever they go off to, the child is always left with that devastation. So yeah, I'm assuming you probably work with a lot of these children too.
I do, and I do usually start working with them. Well, I start working with some of them when they're children, and then if I can be still on their journey as they get older and develop some sort of autonomy, that's where I feel like there's more of a opportunity opening to
Right.
that to happen and
When they
have
start to
exactly.
individuate, right.
The part that I really struggle with is that so many of my patients are dependent on that narcissistic person
Yeah.
to financially and sometimes physically
Yep.
support them.
Right.
That's hard.
Yeah.
And yet it's a reality. I get it. Like if you are so sick that you can't work, um, and you are
I have the
dependent
same
on
thing.
therapy.
I have exactly the same thing. I don't know how you would work with it. I would love to hear how you work with it, because the only way I can work with it is I say to them, okay, I mean, you have to get a job. I mean, we have to get you better, but you have to somehow get out there. And we know like how difficult that can be. And I'm not saying that certainly not 100% of the people that I've worked with under those circumstances have been able to do that. But those that can somehow individuate and break that tether,
Yep.
there's this huge jump in healing that takes
Right.
place when they are no longer under the tentacles of that arrangement.
Oh, absolutely. The people that I've seen who've been able to break free from that and can usually see their parent, from some having some distance for what it is and how they got there, and create a different connection with them. That's beyond powerful. I just also see for most people it is. I don't get the privilege of seeing them get there, which is hard. You know, seeing that type of a thing, feeling like it's that whole this is not your fault, but it is your problem, your challenge, your thing to take on,
Right.
is that's my tough love thing that I swear I do have a gentler way of communicating with patients usually. But it kind of comes down to that of like, you're not wrong to feel victimized by this, but that is not serving you. And it ultimately is preventing even the perspective, of having really true healing in that relationship for either one of the individuals.
I feel you in under those circumstances have it so much harder than I do, because obviously like my work would be to find a way to bolster their ego to not only understand that, but then to take action. Whereas I would almost imagine there are certain scenarios where you're working with individual family members and certain things, and I mean, it must be quite difficult sometimes to see the things that you see and know either that you're drifting out of what they consider to be your scope,
Right.
or that you can also feel that there's no place for what you would like to say to land, or or for anything to be done with that information. I mean,
One of the hardest things I deal with, really. I would say that's one of the heaviest things that I try to navigate with people and can see and feel really, myself more on that helpless side of things for those reasons. It does require people who are open to, and a lot of the times it is referral, because as much time as I spend with my patients, it does require expertise like someone of yourself, and that focus in that area, and being able to dedicate a significant amount of time and attention towards that. Whereas my patients are still like, yes, but what about my urinalysis and my, I need to refill my thyroid. It's like, okay, it is really hard to put all of those things in the context of one practice. But for the patients who really are ready to take that next step, they it's one of the most powerful things too. And I have seen it. I've had the privilege of being able to witness that a handful of times, probably only realistically in my whole career, but those people thrive and can contribute to the world in ways and lessen suffering that is just unbelievable.
Dr. Katie, we could go on for a while, I know, but I just want to thank you so much for your perspective, for the holistic perspective. I mean, that's really what I'm all about these days. The practitioners that I want to surround myself with are those who are able to take that full spectrum approach, and are wrangling and wrestling with the challenges of that, rather than embracing a more partial world and body and self, and believing that it's that safer is better, as we were saying earlier, rather than to develop that resilience and that ability to face the complexity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, thank you so much. I know that you're going to be talking. Um, when is it at the
In March, yeah, at the
in
Medical Academy of Pediatric Special Needs. I will be joining them again, lecturing in North Carolina. They do open that somewhat to some parents that are highly educated, but otherwise it's a really great option for practitioners who are trying to serve, particularly obviously children, although I will say everything I've learned as being part of the MAPS community has transferred over to the adults, because how many of us have also unhealed children inside of us that need to be healed and addressed, but
Mhm.
also the same issues that affect that population overlap completely with everyone else in this complex chronic illness, and especially in that more vulnerable empathic person like you're mentioning earlier. There's a lot of adults out there that have that going on too. So I'm very honored to be part of that very smart, compassionate community. That's so important to me, that these are people who see the humanity and recognize the spirituality and are willing to take on hard aspects of this that are not well defined, as well as looking at all of the well-defined and emerging science, and trying to blend those things to really be the best possible resource to your patients.
Will you be with Dr. Dirksen there? I feel like I saw a photo of you and her at the last one.
We were there together last time. I don't know yet whether Dr. Amy's planning on being at this next one coming up. She's been a MAPS fellow. She was one of the first MAPS fellows that they accepted from a naturopath. For a while, that was completely closed to us, and they've only recently, in the last few years, starting with her trailblazing, been able to change that. So I'm super excited and honored, and they are excited to welcome and embrace us. And this I feel like is a major group that is the future of medicine, that could have a lot of potential to help save some people.
I love it. I believe in you guys. You guys are a powerhouse, so I was thrilled to see you together, and
Oh yeah.
I fully endorse this message. And for those of my audience who, MAPS, not to be mistaken with the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, although I'm sure, Dr. Katie, you would have things to say to them too.
Right.
But,
Right. Yeah. No. Medical Academy of Pediatric Special Needs.
right. Um, and yeah, lastly, just, once again, you mentioned the family. Um, the family's a single system, isn't it? It's just these are not isolated atomistic entities. The parent that comes in and says, "Fix my child." It's, even
Right.
back in the day, I'd be like, "Well, I think it's time to meet with you
Yes.
if you're holding the strings of this marionette." So, I love the fact that we're also, co-embracing this the holistic approach to family, because that's what I have seen has always been what helps the most
Yeah.
for those who are ready to step into that journey. So.
Hmm. Hmm.
Dr. Katie, I hope we can do this again, not in another 15 years' time.
Right. Yeah. Sooner than that this time.
Yeah, although I will say it's always lovely. We still have patients, I think, I
See
mean,
us both.
I hear your name all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I love
So
that.
I'm sure that will keep continuing, and it's just lovely to know that you're out there, not too many hours away from me.
You too. Yes.
Thank you for doing what you're doing, and thank you for being
Thank
here
you.
with me.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.